D'Eriq King is one of the most electrifying talents in college football. Before he was the star quarterback at the University of Miami, he played football at the University of Houston, and at one point, he was actually the 8th string quarterback at his high school. So how did he go from 8th string quarterback his sophomore year to starting quarterback of the number 7 team in the nation? And who is D'Eriq King? In the Who Is series, we go through the backstories of up-and-coming collegiate and pro athletes. If you like what you see, like this video and subscribe to the channel. D'Eriq King was born on August 24th, 1997 in Manville, Texas. Growing up, there was no doubt that King was something special. In 2012, he attended Houston Westbury Christian High School. After about a year of going to Houston Westbury Christian High School, King and his family decided it would be best for him to go to Manville High School in the town where he was born. At the beginning of his sophomore season football camp, King was the 8th string quarterback on the roster. There were a lot of players he would have to surpass to become the starting quarterback in only his sophomore year. However, it was not hard for King, as he was named the Week 1 starter. It was absolutely incredible, and starting King absolutely paid off. In 2013, King was named the District 22-5A overall MVP as a sophomore. He had a jaw-dropping incredible season. In 14 games played, he completed 168 of his 255 passes for 2,628 yards, 36 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. With all those great passing stats, he accompanied it with 164 rushing attempts for 1,289 yards and another 17 touchdowns. In his sophomore season, his first ever starting season as a quarterback, he compiled a total of 53 touchdowns. That is absolutely insane, as he was in a loaded high school quarterback room. He absolutely demolished the competition, and he was one of the most successful high school quarterbacks in the country. King was also a two-sport athlete. In the winter, he played basketball. Now, he wasn't the biggest star, but during his sophomore and junior season, he played in 21 of the 22 games, averaging about 5.1 points per game, and was sort of an option off the bench. Now, it was not super impressive, however, everyone loves to look at someone who brings everything to the table for being a college quarterback. A lot of colleges love when wide receivers play basketball, and when a quarterback does it, it shows he has a plethora of skills. Being such an incredible athlete and being able to do so many different things made him an elite quarterback prospect. In 2014, for his junior season, he played once again in 14 games, completing 204 of his 310 passes for 3,193 yards and 47 touchdowns. During his sophomore season, he only threw 8 interceptions to 36 touchdowns. In his junior year, he threw 47 touchdowns with only 3 interceptions. His touchdown to interception ratio was insane. He also had 110 carries for 780 yards and 12 more touchdowns on the ground. He added 1 reception for 22 yards as well. King was beginning to show that he was a Swiss Army knife and was able to do everything on the field. This is when colleges started to really take notice of King. He had 13 different offers during his time in high school, but schools were starting to kind of figure out who this young star was. The rumblings had already begun, and it seemed like a lot of people thought King was going to commit to TCU. It seemed more and more likely every day that TCU was going to be his college choice. But it was time for his senior season, and he needed to take care of business on the field. In 14 more games, he completed 171 passes on 254 attempts for 2,898 yards and 43 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. He was once again a scoring machine. He added 113 carries for 640 yards and 8 more touchdowns on the ground. He had long rushes of 65 yards his senior year, 64 yards his junior year, and 72 yards his sophomore year. Throughout his entire high school tenure, he completed 543 passes on 819 attempts for 8,719 yards, completing 66.3% of his passes. He threw for 126 touchdowns and only 16 interceptions, and had long passes of 80 yards, 77 yards, and 86 yards. For his career rushing on 387 attempts, he ran for 2,709 yards and 37 touchdowns, adding 5 100-yard games. It was time to get down to business and pick a school. D'Eriq King had offers from 13 amazing college football programs, including Texas A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, Washington, UCLA, Texas Tech, Rutgers, Missouri, Michigan State, Louisville, Kansas State, Clemson, California, Baylor, and TCU. 24/7 Sports Crystal Ball at the time said that King was going to commit to TCU. And he did. He signed a letter of commitment to TCU on January 17, 2015. He committed really early. In fact, he had yet to play his senior season at the time. But after receiving more offers from schools like Missouri and Kansas State, he began to have second thoughts. He thought maybe that he had committed way too early. With all those different schools offering him, officially on December 16, 2015, King decommitted from TCU, and only 8 days later he committed to becoming a Houston Cougar. He saw a better option for his future enrolling at Houston, and that's exactly what he did as he signed his letter of intent on February 3, 2016, and officially enrolled on June 30, 2016. Now, as a highly touted quarterback prospect, there's no way he would actually change his position, right? Well, entering his freshman year at Houston, the wide receiving core was absolutely demolished due to injury, and King decided to enter his freshman year as a wide receiver to help his team out. He played in 10 games, making 4 starts, recording 29 catches for 228 yards and a touchdown. It seemed pretty bizarre, but I guess it ended up working out. In 2017, he ended up playing quarterback and receiver as a sophomore. He didn't start a game at quarterback until Saturday, October 28, 2017. King led his team to a comeback victory over the University of South Florida. He completed 12 of 20 passes for 137 yards and a touchdown. He also had 20 rushing attempts for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns. From this point on, King officially earned the starting quarterback role. The next week, he started against East Carolina University, completing 15 of 21 passes for 330 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 3 carries for 14 yards and another touchdown in a 52-27 rout. The next week, he struggled a bit against Tulane when he completed 18 of his 26 passes for 225 yards and 1 interception. He did, however, do very well on the ground, rushing 10 times for 141 yards and 2 touchdowns. Unfortunately, Houston took the loss in a 20-17 nail-biter at Tulane. His job was pretty much secured, though. The next week versus Navy, he completed 21 of his 27 passes for 277 yards and 1 touchdown, also adding 16 rushing attempts for 57 yards and 2 touchdowns en route to beating Navy 24-14 and qualifying themselves for a bowl game. On December 24th against Fresno State, Houston took a loss in the Hawaii Bowl. King completed 23 of his 43 passes for 270 yards and 1 touchdown. He also rushed 9 times for 38 yards. He didn't have the best game, but no doubt King had impressed his coaches enough that he was the sole starting quarterback for the Houston Cougars. Overall in 2017, he had completed 67 of his 96 passes for almost a 70% completion percentage for 991 yards, 6 touchdowns, as well as rushing for 341 yards and 8 more touchdowns. In 2018, during his junior season, Houston had a bit of a historical season. In every single game except for one, Houston scored 40 points or more. The one exception was a matchup against SMU. King was a huge part of this, as during the season he accounted for a total of 50 touchdowns. Week 1 against Rice, he completed 17 of his 24 passes for 320 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also rushed 7 times for 33 yards and a rushing touchdown for 4 total touchdowns and leading Houston to a 45-27 win. The next week, King did much of the same, as against Arizona he passed for 4 touchdowns and rushed for 2 more touchdowns, leading Houston to another big win by a score of 45-18. The following week, they suffered a tough loss as they lost to Texas Tech University 63-49. However, King arguably played the greatest game of his college career. He completed 30 of his 51 passes for 431 yards, 5 touchdowns, and he also rushed 11 times for 47 yards and another touchdown. There was not much more he could have done himself, accumulating 6 touchdowns. The next week against Texas Southern, Houston absolutely dominated as they won 70-14. King completed 20 of his 25 passes for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns while rushing for another touchdown. He continued his dominance for the next 4 weeks, scoring 41, 42, 49, and 57 points in each of those games. Against Tulsa, he completed 19 of 27 passes for 3 touchdowns, and he also rushed for 117 yards and 2 touchdowns. The next week against East Carolina, he threw for 2 more touchdowns and rushed for another touchdown. He was an absolute rushing machine. In every single game of the season, he had 1 touchdown or more. Against Navy, he was dominant, throwing for another 3 touchdowns with 413 yards, rushing for 50 yards and another touchdown. In the biggest matchup of the season so far against 21st ranked USF, he completed 28 of 40 passes for 419 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also ran 12 times for 132 yards and 2 more scores. He accounted for 7 touchdowns against the first-ranked opponent of the season as they absolutely dominated 57-36. The next week, unfortunately, Houston suffered a loss against SMU by a score of 45-31. King threw for 2 touchdowns and rushed for 50 yards and another touchdown, but unfortunately it wasn't enough. The next week against Temple, they also lost by a score of 59-49. King threw 5 touchdowns and also rushed for another, and it seemed like his defense could not help him out whatsoever. The final week of the season, he did not play the entire game, but he rushed for 82 yards and a touchdown and passed for 82 yards and a touchdown in an absolutely dominating performance against Tulane 48-17. King was sitting on top of the world after the 2018 season, but as we know, he's now the quarterback of Miami. So what happened? Well, it seemed like the entire offense had changed in Houston when newly hired head coach Dana Holgorsen arrived. King only played in 4 games in 2019 because he decided he was going to redshirt for the season. This was shocking because he was the starting senior quarterback. He lost to Oklahoma by a score of 49-31, completing 14 of his 27 passes for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 100 yards and another touchdown, but it wasn't enough. The next week, they destroyed a bad Prairie View A&M team by a score of 37-17. He was okay but not dominant, as he completed 15 of his 26 passes for 140 yards and a touchdown, as well as an interception. He also rushed for 2 touchdowns. Houston then had 2 straight losses to Washington State University and Tulane. After the Tulane game and a 1-3 start, he decided he was going to redshirt for the rest of the season. For his 2019 season, he completed 58 of his 110 passes, a 52% completion percentage, for 663 yards and 6 touchdowns. He threw 2 interceptions, but he also rushed for 312 yards and 6 touchdowns. It seemed like he kind of fell off a cliff in his production. He entered the transfer portal due to being very unhappy at Houston, but in 2020, he decided he was going to play for the Miami Hurricanes. So far this season, through 3 games, King is off to an absolutely incredible start. He's completed 63 of his 94 passes for 736 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. He has also rushed 28 times for 157 yards and a touchdown. If he keeps playing the way he has so far, he may be one of the NFL's top draft prospects this year. Keep an eye on D'Eriq King in Miami for the rest of the 2020 college football season. King has his first real test Saturday against Clemson at 7:30 Eastern on ABC. If you like this video, check out my other videos in the Who Is series. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and remember to embrace the grind.